Okay, so let's start. We can start with a Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death.
and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Okay, so what I wanted to do today, or what I would like to do today, is go back a little bit just to some of the things I mentioned yesterday, because I had a feeling maybe I didn't leave things completely clear. So go over that, and then move into chapter 3, looking at the reason, the will, and the sentiments in the exercise of freedom. Does anyone have anything they want to bring up from yesterday? Question, query, objection? Anyone? No? Okay, if you do, just jump in. But what I want to go over, it was just, we were talking a little bit about vocation, freedom and the vocation. And I just wanted to clarify a little bit, between discerning the vocation and also then I think what came up the question of someone leading the vocation. And so when we talked about discerning the vocation, I suppose the point that I wanted to make there was the one that we play a role in our own vocation. So it's not just God slapping it down, going, you in or you out, but that we, as we cooperate with grace, as we grow in the love of God, we come to a moment where God is able to propose the vocation to us. And so we play a role in that. And then the second point is that, yes, we can still say no. We're free to say no, like the rich young man. It's a big loss, as our Lord shows us with the rich young man, that he went away sad because, if only we knew the gift of God. But the point was that if someone does say no, that doesn't mean that God gives up on them. If we talked to like Cheryl with the defending the rich young man, we don't know what happens afterwards in someone's heart. And if we remain open to God and sincere and all those things, we can still build a relationship with God, which would be different to the original one, his original proposal, but we're not sort of lost. So that love of God and that call to holiness remain until the day someone dies. So that was that first part about discerning and saying yes to a vocation when God proposes it. I think a different situation is the one where perhaps someone has said yes to God, given their word. In many vocations, it involves a vow, though not in Opus Dei, but realizing that in a vocation that we have the grace. First of all, we always have the grace to live that vocation. That is a gift that God has given us for our happiness, that God is always faithful. So God doesn't call us to something that we can't do that way. He's always faithful. He can always be trusted, unlike in any human relationship. So, to walk away from that is a big thing. It's not a small thing, to be unfaithful. But that can involve perhaps, it doesn't happen overnight, I suppose. It can involve a long period perhaps of becoming lukewarm, or little infidelities, little insincerities, mistrusting God, separating from God and not wanting his will in things and letting that build up. So until the point comes that one's heart is no longer God's. And that is serious. And also, I suppose, if someone has carried responsibilities, say a priest who's been running a parish and all these sorts of things, that's a big responsibility to answer to God for. And particularly, the effect that can have on other people. Scandal. We've seen even, in some of the abuses in the church, the scandal, how that can contribute to other people to lose their faith or doubt their faith, or, to sin through bad example or whatever, So that's a big thing. And perseverance is a virtue that we have the grace for each day. You might say, oh, I don't know if I can manage it for 40 years. You don't need to manage it for 40 years right now. You just need to manage it for today, and the grace is today. So we have the grace, and not to separate ourselves from God. But that doesn't mean if a person is unfaithful or whatever happens, through whatever, each person's story is different, but whatever happened, so that doesn't mean that a person can't repair their relationship with God. So very early in the church, one of the early popes had to settle that question, saying there are no unforgivable sins. There are no unforgivable sins. So people can always come back to God, like the prodigal son. Our Lord gives us an example of the prodigal son. So the relationship might not be quite the same, but it can go back to God and we can still become saints. And I think the other point is just seeing the difference perhaps between someone discerning their vocation at the beginning and someone who has been living in that vocation for a long time and knows they have the grace, all these things. So there is a period, I suppose, for people working out whether it's a good fit. And you think, well, okay, the seminaries, lots of generous young men go in. And we know some of those will not end up being ordained. And that doesn't mean that they're rejecting God's will necessarily at all. You think maybe they wanted to be generous, or they were attracted to that life or of the priesthood or whatever, and they see over time that that's not God's will for them. Or perhaps they've been moved by other people's expectations and they realize that over time. Or the church from its side discerns that it's not the right thing for that person. Those are two ways. So, that's one thing that happens. And you think when a person's being generous with God, God always rewards that in some way, that generosity. That's not the same thing as, say, someone who'd been a priest for 25 years and then changes his mind. It's a very different kind of a scenario. So, and I think that even then, when that happens, we need to ask ourselves, well, how much do I support? And like St. Josemaria used to say, he'd say, I don't know any bad priests. I know sick priests, weak priests, but I don't know bad priests. And he would really talk to people about the need to help people to be strong in their vocations. Does that clarify things a little bit? Or have I made it worse? Okay. All right. Okay. So any questions, comments? Yeah. I can't see a lot of faces today. Oh no, here's the faces. They're looking grim. Okay. So, all right. If anyone's got any questions, you can email me as well, or ring me if you want to talk. Okay. So what I wanted to go on to, so just finish with this slide, which is about responsibility precisely. And when we say yes to God, we do take on responsibilities. Okay? So with St. Josemaria, he says, many great things depend, don't forget it, on whether you and I live our lives as God wants. So that we can be instruments. God can do many great things when we say yes and when we cooperate with grace. And if we decide we don't want to do it, okay, maybe you can find someone else. he's going to achieve the work of salvation. But there's a lot at stake. Okay, so yeah, and then there's another, trust always in God. He does not lose battle. Always. Okay, so did anyone watch this video? I sent you this little video clip. This is this one talking about the freedom of children of God. So this little boy jumped up. He's autistic, and he was sort of playing around, even like playing with the ribbons on the Swiss Guard's coat. And he talks about how we can be in front of God with that simplicity of children not being afraid. So it's really nice if you want to have a look at it. It's only 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about today. I think we mentioned it earlier. But this idea of integrating the reason, the will, and the sentiments when we go and exercise our freedom. So what's the basis of our actions when we decide what we're going to do? What is moving us? What is motivating us? And so for us, we know that our powers, if you like, that we have that move us are the intellect and the will and the passions or the emotional life. So that life of the intellect and the will are those spiritual faculties of the soul by which we can know the truth. We can, as we want to do, and choose the means to do it. And the will is that power that puts it into practice, that wants what the will shows us. So intellect discerns the good, discerns what's true, if you like, and the will looks at it and evaluates it in light of good. Is it good or bad? To what extent is good? And we respond to that. The sentiments are a little bit different. So we have sentiments and they're important in freedom. So we shouldn't try to get rid of them, but they're not the source of freedom. So today perhaps we can have a movement where we think like when you're just following your sentiments, that's when you're being free. We say, well, actually in themselves, they're not. So we know animals have sentiments. Any beings, once they have knowledge, sense knowledge, usually there's some sort of capacity that allows us to respond to what we know. So, I mean, a sheep, if a sheep sees a wolf running at it, the knowledge of the wolf is not enough to do any good to the sheep. It needs to be able to do something about it. And so what instinct does is when there's knowledge, there's some kind of a reaction. I'm not saying that sheep have a rich emotional life, that's what I'm saying, but they have, they're able to experience fear, perhaps anger, desire, those sorts of things. And so they move on those. They're part of a chain of instinct that builds on what's known through instinct and experience. And then they act following those sentiments or those passions. They don't get to stop and reason it through. So the sheep sees a wolf coming for it and it runs. Okay? There's instant, I suppose, fear, and that triggers the desire to run. That can happen to us. Just I know my local beach is not patrolled, so a lot of people walk their dogs down there off the leash. And, you know, you see dogs love the beach. And when it's time to go home, invariably they don't want to go home. People sort of trying to carry their wet dogs off the beach. And you think, well, it's part of, you know, they know what they enjoy. That's what they want to do. And you can't reason with a dog. You know, you can try and bribe a dog with the idea of something better, like, you know, a nice juicy bone when you get home or something. But I don't know if even that works. But, you know, you can't reason. You know, they're moving on sentiments. And those sentiments essentially for them relate to survival and pleasure or passion, you know, those sorts of things, or danger and what they don't like. That makes sense. So we do that as well. But if we just work at that level, we're kind of going to behave like a toddler all our lives. So as human beings, those are not a source of freedom, but they're a great motivating force. You know, when a toddler chucks a tantrum, there's a lot of energy in there for getting what they want. You think, if I had that much energy to go for what I wanted, I'd change the world. You know? So we can say, so feelings are not a source of freedom, okay, but they have a big influence on how we exercise it. So when we reason, you know, I should probably do this, I shouldn't do that. You know, you go to buy, you know, you walk past a shoe shop and you see this amazing pair of shoes, and there's this attraction, you know, this love for shoes. You know, I must possess you. You know, well, then the intellect comes in and it sort of says, well, okay, do I need them? Have I got the money? You know, this is going to cause upset in the home if I bring home my 5th pair of shoes this week or whatever. You know, we can think about those things and we can take our feelings into account that we like something, but we're able to not be directed by it. And that's why we can make free decisions. We're not just working on instinct. So they do influence us, definitely. It can make it very hard for us to keep a clear mind. You know, our passions can be quite influenced by our feelings in a particular moment. And so we shouldn't just try to get rid of them or suppress them. You know, so being really free or, you know, living a good moral life is not about just crushing down your feelings and stopping them to get in the way, which is what you can try to do with voluntarism. You know, is don't think about how you feel about it, just do it. So St. Josemaria, in with Christian tradition, really, didn't have a spiritualistic idea of the Christian life. Right? He was very much saying, well, we are made of body and soul, and there are things that come with having a body, and the emotional life is part of that. So instead of trying to get rid of it, we need to integrate it. You know, God has given us capacities for our good. So that, okay, they're wounded by original sin, but they have an important function. So we integrate them with our intellect and our will. And we'll look a bit how we can do that, you know, rather than trying to repress them or letting them lead. So have you seen the movie Titanic? Remember Titanic? Yeah, so, yeah, and that sort of became that model of love. You know, it was just all emotion, pure emotion. You think, well, that kind of relationship, is that really a lasting relationship? Is that what love is? Where's your brain? Where's your goals in life? Is purely moving on the passion of the moment. So St. Josemaria, he uses this example, which I thought was nice, about how to deal with this struggle we can sometimes have between our emotions or our passions and our intellect. Okay? So he says, may you be upright because you struggle, trying to reconcile the two brothers we have inside us, intelligence with the grace of God and sensuality. These brothers are inside us from birth, and they accompany us throughout our lives. We should try to get the two to coexist. Even though they may clash, try to get the superior brother, the intellect, to lead the inferior one, the senses, along with it. Our soul, by the dictate of faith and intelligence, and with the help of God's grace, aspires to better gifts, paradise, to eternal happiness. So we lead the little brother, sensuality, there too, so that it may enjoy God in heaven. So the sensuality doesn't really, I mean, our passions and emotions at the moment, you know, don't really think about heaven, eternal joy. You say, well, I can eat this big chocolate cake, or I could offer it up for the whole cells in purgatory. You know, the emotions aren't too worried. But, you know, we can make them work together. So, okay. So the importance of the sentiments. So they're part of being wholehearted.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
So if someone says, you know, I love you, I love you, it's a bit of a letdown. I mean, there might be moments when that's how it is, you know, but wholeheartedness is being able to put your whole self into what you love, into what you want, you know, into what you choose with your intellect and your will. And St. Thomas says the reason and the will need to be helped to a certain degree by the energy of the passions. So we can actually try to pick the passions up, you know, and to love, when we can learn to love what the intellect sees as good, you know, when at our sensitive level and our spiritual level we can see the same good, then we can work with things with a lot more passion, you know, doing what we're passionate about. And that's where the life of virtue comes in, which we'll look at a little bit later, you know, the human virtues. So human virtues aren't about repressing your feelings or getting rid of them or saying they're evil. The passions are about acquiring good taste, essentially, learning to enjoy what is really good. You know, once the intellect discovers what's truly good, educating the passions to have a taste for the good. And in the Catechism, which is also quoting St. Thomas, says, the perfection of the moral good consists in man's being moved to the good, not only by his will, but also by his heart. So putting the whole person. So if we kind of think the moral life is about leaving part of ourselves out or having to squash it or repress it, we'll be able to do good stuff, but we're really missing out on a lot, you know, that God is actually giving us the opportunity to do. So, yeah. So, St. Paul,
can I ask a question?
Quoting him,
Ailish?
talks about the sentiments in the spiritual life and having the same sentiments of Jesus Christ. Christ was true God and true man. Yeah? And we see when you look in the Gospel, how he cried, how he had close friends, you know, all these different moments. At one stage he was angry. And then St. Josemaria says in Forge, he says, I don't ask you to take away my feelings, Lord, because I can use them to serve you with. But I ask you to put them through the crucible, so that purifying our feelings, you know, purifying the emotional life. Yeah, I'm getting lots of messages.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sorry about that.
Okay, that's
yes,
okay.
Please.
So just going back to a couple of slides, you mentioned
yes.
that feelings can influence emotions and actions. But then, but with God's grace, we need to use our intellect and not suppress our emotions, but with our intellect, we need to sort of decipher what is right and wrong.
I think so. So it's the intellect that knows, like, the emotions as such, the passions only know the sense responses, you know, so it knows the smell of coffee and all those things, you know, and so you walk past the coffee shop, you smell coffee and you want it, desire automatically arises. That's not a moral choice, you just desire it, right? But then where it becomes a moral question is your intellect and your will. This is where your freedom comes in, because you don't choose the passion arising in that situation, that desire. But the intellect and the will come in and they make the decision, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So if you purely follow your feelings, you'd be like an animal, like just following on instinct. You know, there's a desire, I'm going to satisfy it. But the role of leading us actually belongs to the reason and the will. They are the source of our freedom. And so what the reason has to do is think about it. Okay? Think about, well, it doesn't need to be a long introspection, you know, but as well, am I going to do this? Am I going to go and buy coffee or not? And so that way, even if we decide I'm going to follow this desire, it's a decision we've made with our intellect and our will. They've been involved, and they have to be the ones that make the moral decision. So, you know, the moral acts are ones that we do with knowledge and consent. Okay. Now, what the reason can also do, that say an animal or something can't do, is it can recognize the influences on it. Okay. So we can recognize, all right, like I said the other day, I'm really angry right now, you know, or someone hurt my feelings, and so now I feel like eating a whole box of Tim Tams to make myself feel better. So our intellect might know that eating a whole box of Tim Tams is not the best thing to do, but we still feel like it. Okay, and the intellect can go, okay, I know this, I know I want to do it because I'm looking for some sort of consolation to make myself feel better. You know? It's like, I think it's in AA, they teach, is it HALT, if you've heard of that? They say, you know, when someone feels like picking up a drink, ask, you know, am I hungry? You know, am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? And once I understand what's actually going on, I can actually do something better. Okay, well, I feel like a drink, but when I stop and think about it, I'm actually hungry. So go get a sandwich. Or I'm angry. You know, I want to have this because I'm angry or because I'm lonely, or make a phone call. You know what I mean? So the reason can think about what's influencing it and decide whether it's a good influence or not. Because sometimes it is. Sometimes it's completely appropriate.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yep. Thank you for that.
Righty. So, and so when we talk about this idea of how we can know about, realize the passions are influencing us and take that into account, we can, you know, I said before that some passions arise without our wanting it, you know, so that desire for something perhaps arise. It's not necessarily moral. That response, perhaps if someone shoves us on the bus, you know, and you have this response of getting annoyed, it's not moral, you know. What's moral is what you decide to do about it. So if you decide to step on their toe, you know, to get revenge, well, that's a choice you make, you know. Or you decide to go, okay, this anger is not appropriate. He didn't mean it, you know, I can let it go. And that becomes a virtuous thing. Okay? So they're the passions that come before the action. And we judge those passions and we decide how we're going to respond to them. But then there are also passions that can arise that we can call up, you know, that help us to do things with our whole heart, to get enthused about something. So you know, again, like, well, I'd rather eat this piece of chocolate cake than offer it up for the holy souls of purgatory. Right? But then I think of somebody I specifically know who died recently and who I care about. Suddenly I'm a lot more motivated to offer up my piece of chocolate cake for them. You know? So we can bring those other feelings up and they can actually help us to act well. It's like putting some extra energy and motivation into it. So we kind of need, it's like if we try and get rid of the emotions, it's like we're one engine down, put it that way. Okay, so you can't fly just on your passions, that won't work. But if you try and work without them, you're missing the whole that God has given us this whole dynamism that we can use to help us with our actions. Okay, so the idea is, as I'm saying here, that it's the intellect that knows what's really important. It's the intellect that knows God. You know, like you don't know God through the senses. You'll never smell God. You won't taste God, all those things. So that's not what your desire for God's going to come from. It comes from the intellect. The feelings don't always go along with that. You know? So the idea is the intellect which leads, okay, educates the little brother, the feelings, and tries to bring them along. You know? So it's like, I think I've said this before, but the example I use it for my students is when you're trying to acquire a virtue, you know, so let's say often they don't make their beds, they don't even know how to make a bed, right? And they might, you know, they watch their Netflix in bed, they eat in bed, you know, they do their assignments in bed, and they might go, you know, I like my room like this. I like it messy. I like having crumbs in my bed because I can snack, you know, whatever it is. You know, I like it. It's comfortable. You know, I haven't changed the pillowcase for 3 months, whatever it is. And then they start, and I say, okay, why don't you make your bed? And you make your bed the first time, and it's no fun. You don't feel any better about it, right? You make your bed the second time, it's no fun. You don't feel any better about it. It's a big effort. But you make your bed for 2 weeks, and you start to realize it's actually not very hard. It's actually not hard. And it's actually quite nice to have that feeling that you've made your bed. It's quite nice to come home and find it tidy, you know? So little by little, you acquire, what we say, like we acquire a taste for the good as you acquire the virtue. So acquiring a virtue is hard work. But once you have the virtue, it actually makes things easier. So we tend to think of a virtue, a lot of people tend to think of virtues as something that are very arduous and difficult. But actually, it's the acquiring it that's difficult. Once you've got it, it makes life much easier. Make sense? Yes? Right, I want to get on to a workshop. So, yeah. Now, we talked about this the other day. Voluntarism. We talked about voluntarism a lot, remember? Which was that doing things on effort alone, just working on willpower, okay? And the positives and negatives of that. And there's a little bit on that in the reading I gave you from Self-Esteem Without Selfishness. If you have that book, it also has a little bit on intellectualism and sentimentalism in other parts. But so voluntarism tries just to work on the willpower. Okay? Intellectualism is where you try to just lead with your brain and not rely on the other bits. Again, don't worry about how you feel. Don't think about it. Just reason your way through. Okay? So it can be very cold and even calculating way of doing it. You know, don't ask what you love, don't ask what you want, just think through. Sentimentalism is perhaps one of the more common problems, perhaps more than that. So how would you define sentimentalism? Any volunteers?
Yes.
Just going on your emotions? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, to allow the sentiments to direct our actions by themselves without any other assistance from intellect or will.
Yes, exactly. So when we say an ism, it's kind of when you take something and you make it absolute, you put it at the top. So sentimentalism is when you let yourself be led by your feelings, your sentiments, your emotions. And we can mistake that for freedom sometimes. So you think, I feel like I'm being true to myself when I follow my feelings. And my freedom is being restricted if I'm not doing what I feel like in a particular moment. What are some of the problems of that, like of identifying sentimentalism with freedom, thinking that that's the same thing as freedom? Or some of the problems of letting yourself be led by the sentiments?
Is it similar to relativism?
A little bit, in that relativism says everything is just up to you, and you've got nothing to measure against except yourself. But this is more about yourself and what you use to make decisions. Yeah. So one of the effects of relativism can be sentimentalism, but not necessarily. This is more what's happening inside you, where you're sort of saying, I'm letting this lead. But yeah, there's definitely a relationship. Yeah.
Is it being self-opinionated if you're a sentimentalist?
It can be, because you don't need reasons for things,
Just what
so
you think. Yeah.
you don't bother to think it through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and your
It
feelings
just feels
change.
wrong. Yeah, and that's the key problem. Oh, well, one of the key problems with sentimentalism is that your feelings change. Today I feel head over heels in love with someone. The next day they've got a big pimple on their nose, and I don't feel quite so attracted. Or 10 years later they're bald or whatever it is. If we're just moving on our feelings and our emotions, it's not very reliable. So that's the first thing they change. The second is that they tend to be reactive. They react to stimuli, So the weather's good, I feel happy. I want to go and tiptoe amongst the tulips. Right? The next day it's raining, I feel gloomy. So you're always reacting to things. This person was nice to me, this person wasn't nice to me. You're really just at the wind for whatever's affecting you, because you're not really making rational choices about your response to things. But yeah, the other problem is, as you were suggesting, Andrew, that with sentimentalism, you don't need reasons for things. You don't need a reason. So you can just have an opinion. You don't know why you think what you think. It doesn't matter, because you feel it really intensely. Okay? One thing that comes up in one of the readings, it was saying even in the idea of love, did you read the reading of Edward Sri? I don't know if anyone got to read that. But he says, sometimes what happens is you think you're in love with a person, but actually you're in love with the feelings that you have about the person, so that person makes me feel special. So maybe I'm not loving the person. It's good that make you feel special, right? If someone doesn't make you feel special. But what you're not really loving the person so much as the good feelings they are arousing you. And what's important to me is the good feelings I have. And if at some stage that person ceases to arouse those good feelings, that love is not there, because what I really loved was the feelings and not the person for who they are in themselves. So the two things are related. Like, if you don't like a person, you probably shouldn't marry them. That's sort of pretty obvious, right? But and he kind of talks about that sometimes we tend to think, he talks about the question of how we can tend to idealize people. And, when you fall in love with someone, you project all the good qualities onto them and get unrealistic about it. And that's a lot of pressure on the other person, because you expect them to be all sorts of things. But he says, instead of asking, is it really true, about this person, what we tend to ask are my feelings really true? Do I really feel this about this person? Which is not the same question. Because, yeah, I feel this about this person, but that doesn't mean it's true about that person. So sentimentalism, yeah, it can turn us in on ourselves quite a lot, even while we think we're loving. It's about our own feelings. So again, it's not about getting rid of those, but it's about integrating them, making them work with our intellect and our will. So really knowing a person for who they are, not just for how they make you feel. yeah, being able to love someone. So sometimes you might even have a wish list. I remember one of my sisters came home, Mum said, and she had this really long list. And she said, this is all the qualities the guy has to have if I'm going to marry him, you know. I was like, good luck with that. It was a really long list. You think, well, sometimes you might meet somebody and they don't have all those qualities, you know. You're not marrying a list of qualities. It's a person, you know. And so you might think, oh, well, I can change them. Well, if that's what's important, don't marry that person, because you need to be ready. Well, what if they don't change? You know, it's the person for who they are. You know, maybe you can hope they'll change, but you have to be ready for them not to. So what I've got here is some questions. So in the book of Edward Sreed, which I really recommend if you haven't actually read it before, but you know, John Paul II as well talks about the idea in love, in human love, of the need to integrate all parts of the human person, and that we're body and soul. So love is not purely a spiritual thing. Conjugal love is not purely spiritual, it's not purely physical, it's not purely emotional. So there's those different stages. So, you know, the beginning with the physical attraction that people experience, if it stops there, you know, it's not particularly human necessarily. So, you know, animals can have physical attraction. The affective attraction is that emotional life, which is very important, obviously. But again, it doesn't necessarily extend to what we call spiritual love. And spiritual love is where we involve the whole person. So our emotions, our intellect, and our will, you know, in love. And you need to use the intellect and the will, because through the intellect and the will that we can know a person for who they are in themselves. So if you're just working on a purely emotional level, again, it's about how you feel, kind of thing. The physical only covers the bodily thing, but to know someone for who they are in themselves it requires the spirit, requires the intellect, you know? And that is essential if a person is going to be unique and irreplaceable. You know? So if you love someone, I think uses the example in his book, if Romeo and Juliet, you know, there and Juliet wakes up one morning and Romeo's lost his nose, well, that love is just going to fizzle out so fast. That was so passionate. You know, there's more to it than that. The same thing that you can replace somebody. You can always find somebody who has better physical qualities or characteristics than a person. You can perhaps find someone who makes you feel better or makes you feel more special or whatever it is. But you can never replace the person for who they are in themselves. They're unique and irreplaceable. And it's only when we reach that level of love, you know, when we know a person that way, that we can love someone, you know, I suppose when things change. That person, not what they have, not what they do, you know, not how they make you feel, but for who they are in themselves. So reaching the soul of that person as well. That makes sense? He talks quite a lot about that. And he talks about if you don't reach that level, how the physical and affective can perhaps go off course and become selfish. They can sort of not develop into that true human love, which is what they're made for. So I put a couple of questions here. I don't know if the questions are clear. So do they make sense, the questions to you? Yeah? Okay, well, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm trying to put you into breakout rooms. Okay? If it doesn't work.
Ailish, hang on.
Yeah? Yeah. Tell me, Lisa.
I just need to take a photo.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I won't remember.
Okay. So, all right. So I might put like 10 minutes or something, then we can come back and talk. Okay. And if it works, then we'll do another one after. Okay. So let's see what happens. Everybody back? Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So how'd you go? Does anyone want to start?
We went well, and as you know, no one wants to talk.
Yes. No. Okay, someone from the first breakout room want to pick one of these questions and comment?
I think, hang on, sorry, let me just bring the photo up. In a way, we kind of went down the line of knowing and almost to say loving yourself before, rather than looking for, that way you're looking for someone to compliment you rather than someone to fulfill something that you feel's missing. I don't know. I just find that the young ones now are really obsessed with, you know, I don't know, everything. It's on social media, so then you want to be like that person. Well, you need to accept who you are first, with your strengths and weaknesses, and that then gives you personal freedom and helps you then with all the three loves, and not because I don't think that your love will last, obviously, if you're not integrating the three. I think if something drastic happens, you know, you're married and, I don't know, in an accident, and then that's it, the physical love is gone, well, then that's limited. And for love to last, you need to have the three, I think. Anyway, that
I
was
thought
good
what
that
you're saying, I think what you're saying about that, the sense of self-worth is really interesting, in terms of where they talk about codependence and that sort of thing, where if your sense of self-worth comes from somebody else.
Yep.
That can become,
a problem. So I think basically that stems from the fact in my policy of you know, not going out with someone while you're too young till you've developed who you yeah, so that you have to know yourself and I think effectively grow up. You see in high school, you see so many kids going out with each other, and it's just like it's like an appendix rather than a true love.
I think that's a really good point, Lisa.
Yeah. I also think the emotion is very important in the beginning, because it can give you a lead onto what the person's like, you know, and what you're looking for as well. I think that's important. Like if this person really keeps embarrassing me or keeps annoying me or irritating me, I can sort of, maybe it's me, but maybe it's the person too, you know, and I need to find out why. Is it, you know, I need to sort that all out and get it right. And so that I could get to learn about the person more, you know, and learn about myself more in the relationship as well. Those things are not to be sneered at, and that's why there needs to be that integration as well.
So you can't be too spiritualized, or, you know.
Yeah, because then you could sort of be missing something really, really important about the person. It's not too late until you're married.
Sorry. What I was going to say was, can you hear me? Because I know my, okay. The signal's really poor where I am, so I'm not having such a great experience, but anyway, that's all right. It's not your fault. I sort of disagree a little bit, maybe, Lisa, because I think that you can't wait till you're grown up to start experiencing things. You're never going to get it right. Your whole life, you're never going to get it right. So I think we've got to accept that too in our children, that they're going to make those mistakes, learning about other relationships and so forth. I just don't think we can, I don't know, you may not have meant like wrap them up until...
No, I'm meaning high school. I'm meaning once you've left school, because as a teacher, I see.
I mean, you're seeing it in a different age to what I saw it, I guess.
Yeah,
you know,
they're not grown up yet.
Learning about those relationships while you're at school, I think, is important, but and it just happens gradually. But we can't. It's a normal process, I think, and you learn a lot about yourself by taking risks, in a way. So anyway.
You can't always have control over who you meet and when you meet them. And you can't control your children all the time. And the thing is that you may give them good advice, but you're really not in the driver's seat when they're about 15, 16, or even earlier. You have to.
And so I don't know if you saw the clip that I sent of St. Josemaria talking about children's freedom, you know, and how difficult it is, that task of respecting a child's freedom, like when you know that it's not. Maybe you see where it's going, but it must be a real challenge. Okay. Anyone else?
What were the other quick ones?
We're talking about the different features of those types of love. What happens if they're not integrated, or how that can manifest, what sort of problems it can lead to if you don't have it integrated. And then how you could help a young person to learn to recognize this and integrate it.
I think you have to highlight the really important things, you know, like you just said. I always say to my kids, make sure that they always tell the truth, they respect the truth. If they ever tell a little lie, you know what I mean, your antenna must go up. And also that they know how to love. Do you know that they know that you can see that in their relationships with other people, that it's not just you, but they love their mother and they love their brothers and sisters. I think those are the really big things to look for anyway.
What is love? I mean, in the sense that you can teach them that love means thinking about doing things for other people, because that's what we teach them anyway, whether it's with our relationship with ourselves, extended family, or a prospective boyfriend or girlfriend. Thinking about how you can do things for the other person rather than expecting things done for you. So it's one aspect.
I remember when my children were in high school and they discussed issues that their friends had, and they could see that maybe their friend was making a mistake. And I said, well, why don't you discuss it with them properly? Just don't talk behind their back, or because they may not have anyone who's going to point out to them their mistake. And I think that was a big thing. I mean, was that your children could actually help their friends, and that's helping them to see this, the spiritual side of love is that you're still going to be my friend, but you're making a mistake and I want better for you. So I think in a way that's a good way of helping your children learn that spiritual love, the seeing Christ in the other person and being able to see their defects, love them with them, but also trying to help them to improve. But anyway, so discussing that and how you would angle that with your children, I found that very helpful for them. Because there was a bit of an inclination to I can't hear you, Marina.
I think Pauline was,
Yeah, I just was jumping in over somebody else. It's a bad habit, isn't it? Now, in our group, we were one of the things that came to the front there, I think from Shoba in Victoria, was the very strong importance of our own the children seeing our own relationships and the way that we live the integration of those three things without, I suppose, thinking constantly of integrating those three things. But if they see it, they'll value it, one would hope.
Anyone else?
Just briefly, we discussed on that particular topic about showing our children that, yes, we talked about, trying to be an example, but then I also thought, well, they're going to see all the nuts and bolts and all the failings, and that's a good thing.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, that's reality and that's real relationships. As you were saying before, we just see them through rose-coloured glasses in the beginning. We sort of impose, these great virtues on other people, unrealistic virtues. And just accepting each other's faults and failings, and then apologising. Apologies are a big thing. Forgiveness, they're fundamental and crucial to any relationship.
Yeah, so being able to maybe accept other people's limitations as well. So, yeah, which is not easy. Okay. Yeah, one thing, anyone else want to comment on this? Anything they want to bring up? Okay, well, I'll move on to the next bit because we're talking about wholeheartedness, like St. Josemaria, when he talks about the heart, he talks about that as meaning the whole person. So the intellect, the will, the emotions, everything, the whole person. Okay. So integrating everything. Yeah. So this idea of wholeheartedness. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the video of Brené Brown on the power of vulnerability. If you haven't seen it, and I've shown it too often, but if you haven't seen it, I recommend watching it. It's a TED Talk. And one of the points, well, the main point she's talking about is this idea of wholeheartedness. She says that she started out she was a researcher and she wanted to talk about shame and, defeat it basically. And she started writing to people and asking, what are the things that make you isolated or shamed and all those things. And she said, what she came down to in the end is that the people who felt like the people who lived in a wholehearted way, were people who felt they were worthy of love and belonging, essentially. That's what she kind of said, that if they felt that, then they tended to live that. And which is a bit, I think, maybe what Lisa was sort of indicating a bit. But she looks a lot at this idea of vulnerability, the ability to be hurt, and how we respond to that. Like sometimes we don't take that risk of using our whole heart because we don't want to get hurt. We don't want to get rejected. We don't want to be exposed, And in a way, I think she looks a little bit at how that affects our freedom in terms of how we act, how we love. She says how we parent, when we hold part of ourselves back. And she doesn't sort of specifically get down to this, but I think what she's tapping into is this idea that for human beings, we need these reciprocal relationships, and we need self-giving in order to realize ourselves. We need to be able to do that. But there's so many things that can hold us back from doing it, from exercising that freedom. She says even like things like saying, I love you first, how hard that can be, because you are potentially exposing yourself to that not being appreciated, to that not being reciprocated, that sort of thing. So, she sort of says staying vulnerable, I think you're saying we need to take risks. So staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection. So, sometimes we kind of armor up. That's why I had this picture. We sort of armor up a bit so we don't get hurt. We don't let people hurt us. And when we do that, we can't live in a fully open human way. So she's saying that ability to take risks, to open ourselves up so we can live wholeheartedly. Anyway, so if you haven't looked at it, you might find that interesting. See what she's, and everybody's seen that video by now. So there's a lot to talk about with other people. And then we talk about the sacred humanity of our Lord, this idea of wholeheartedness. That I think it's Dietrich von Hildebrand says that, we don't talk about the sacred intellect of Christ or the sacred will of Christ. We talk about the sacred heart of Christ. So that he is that model, true God and true man. It's not known from. So, the importance of using our heart. I'm not sort of wrapping it up so it can't get hurt. Okay, I think I'm going to jump over this one and maybe jump over that one. But, right. So the question, what does it mean to do something for love? What does this actually mean? We say, oh, but if we do it out of love, that's okay. Even if we don't feel like it, what does it actually mean?
When you're not expecting a return, you do it without any return, anything, or where you do it just because you want to do it and you're not expecting anything back.
So it's like for the sake of the person, not for what you're going to get
in return
back out of it. Yeah. It's something that comes up in the self-esteem. Well, I thought this was a good one. Definition of love. What does it mean to do something for love? Some of the qualities. So love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't envy. It doesn't boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. That's a pretty good standard for love for us. But that idea, it's not about ourselves. It's when we do something for, patiently, kindly, we're not seeking ourselves in it, we're not seeking our own fulfillment, all that sort of stuff. And we're not just doing it because it's our duty, but because, we do it for the good of the other. So an important part for us as human beings, an important part of love is self-giving. And I think it's important because in our Western society, at least, it's very much about individualism and self-sufficiency. Is the quality, of being independent and of being self-sufficient. And we find it hard to have to ask for help sometimes, to show we can't do it by ourselves, to need to depend on others. It's something that we can see as a weakness. But actually to do something for love, it's for another person. But it's part of that giving. So, I've heard a couple of girls say to me this year when they're talking about marriage, say, I don't want to be a doormat. And I find that quite confronting. I don't want to be a doormat. And I was like, wow, because it's kind of saying, well, it's going to be, you either have to stand up for yourself and hold your ground, or you become a doormat. And part of that's the consequences of original sin. But part of it also is thinking, well, to give yourself to become a doormat, and some people become doormats out of love, so other people can tread more gently, and other people, maybe it's because they're being abused by other people. But, to give is not to be a doormat that way. It's something that's free and that is fulfilling for us as human beings if we do it in the right way, for the right reason. If we have that sense of self-esteem. Okay, so St. Josemaria talks about self-giving, doing it with our heart. He says giving is a vital need for those in love. And he points out what he desires from us. He doesn't care for riches or fruits, etc., etc. He wants something intimate, which we have to give him freely. My son, give me your heart. Because it's only when we give ourselves that we can offer other gifts to others. So, with St. Peter, I remember that scene at the end of St. John's Gospel after the resurrection, when he goes talking for a walk and talk on the beach with St. Peter, and he doesn't ask him, are you sorry? Are you repentant? Are you going to make up? Like, the question he asks is, do you love me? And that's the test that he's got there, because it involves everything else. In Gaudium et Spes, which is a document from the Second Vatican Council, it says, man who is the only creature on earth which God willed for itself cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. So that today I think can seem very paradoxical. Two of our residents, was it last year or the year before, they did an experiment on campus where they went to uni, and they decided they'd be the one, when everyone's coming out of the classroom or the lecture theatre, they'd hold the door to let people go through and just see what happened, how many people bothered to say thank you or whatever. And one of them, and she said you could actually, after a while, you could tell which faculty you were in, because she said one of them said she was in a classroom and all these law students were coming out, and this guy walked past and, I don't know, she said something because he hadn't said thank you. And he said, just because I don't aspire to be a doormat. So it's really interesting. It was this experiment she was doing. So this idea of being a gift of self, it does make us vulnerable in a way, because we are always vulnerable to being rejected or vulnerable to being used, taken for granted. And that's even with Adam and Eve at the beginning after original sin. There's that rupture between them, because there's that fear of abuse, being looked at to be used, not to be seen for who they are in themselves, which is why they have to sort of wear clothes, they have to have the little fig leaves sewn together and stuff. So this idea of how does freedom fit, it seems paradoxical that by giving yourself, that's an important part of realising, your freedom of fulfilling yourself. I don't know if you've come across that at all. Yep.
Are you sharing your screen with us at the moment?
Am I not sharing my screen? Yeah. Oh man, I wish.
Yeah. I can't see it.
You can't see my screen.
No. Just I can see everybody.
I can see you. I'm sorry. So all that time you haven't seen my screen?
No.
See that slide?
Now I can't see you.
Now we've lost you. Oh yes.
I could see you before.
Oh, good.
No, I'm here. I'm still here. So okay. Did you see that slide?
Yeah.
I can't see you now.
No. It's just since the break.
So we had some nice slides. We had
lovely.
this slide about wholeheartedness.
So we saw that. Yeah.
We had freedom and wholeheartedness.
Oh, nice.
Brown. Skip that one and that one. And so the Corinthians. And so now, so our Lord with them on the beach. So now I'm up to this idea of freedom and self-surrender. I'm saying this, that self-giving is a central part of being human, really, and fulfilling ourselves. So that's the thing. So, and our Father talked about, this term of freedom and self-surrender. And I don't know about you, but I used to look at this and go, self-surrender, you can really only make that compatible with freedom if you play word games. Was my kind of idea. So it was really about just submitting yourself. And so I had to have a long think about it and think, what am I not getting here? And I realized what I'm not getting is understanding what surrender is. So I don't know how you understand the term surrender. To me, I understood it in terms of medieval warfare. You've got a castle and you've got a siege and they're going to throw rocks over the top, and if they get in, they're going to slaughter everybody. So surrender is when you have to go, I have no other option but to submit myself. But that's surrender. So obviously that's not a particularly positive thing. So what it brings with it for me, it was bringing with it things like, power, that there's domination, there's a winner, there's a loser, you know, I see that's not free. Where there is another very different understanding of what surrender is, which I hadn't thought about, you know. So let's say you're in your medieval castle and you're all armoured up and you see someone coming and you're all ready to fight to the death. And then you realise that it's actually somebody you love, a really good friend. Well, actually, you open the door and you run out to go and say hello. So you're kind of, it's a thing of there's nobody to fear. You realise, you know, there is nobody to have to fight off. It's, you know, we can surrender ourselves when we know that we're safe, when we know we're loved. Okay? That's that thing of giving ourselves. So, I mean, that was kind of something I had to work through. It might be completely obvious to you. But yeah, so like if I was saying, I can't understand freedom without freedom without surrender, or surrender without freedom. One reality underscores. And it's true anyway, when you can't surrender to someone, you aren't completely free in some ways, because you've got all these walls you've built up around yourself to keep yourself safe, to sort of protect what you see as your freedom, okay? Or your rights, or whatever. By holding it back, I don't know what you think about that. But I think it's just tapping into that idea of saying, well, if we're not giving, if we don't have this self-giving, we're missing out on so much. We're misunderstanding what freedom is about. So I had another little set of questions on freedom. We've only got about 15 minutes left. I don't know if you want to do these or not. We can take a way to think about. What have I got left? I'm pretty much done, actually. Do you want to have a little time to talk about these and then we finish? Yeah? Okay, so this is just questions. So taking from self-esteem without selfishness, it talks about perfection of love having 4 qualities. It says there's 2 visual qualities, which are capacity for sacrifice and respect for freedom, and 2 invisible qualities, which are rectitude of intention, so having the right intention, and interior freedom. And so it calls that like the body and the soul of love. Thinking like, how do these qualities relate to freedom? And so I thought maybe you could choose one. So there's the capacities for sacrifice. And these are the questions he puts with it as being interesting for assessing how they're important in a relationship. But capacity for sacrifice, respect for freedom, your intention, or interior freedom. Okay? So, and then he goes on to talk about self-esteem, self-sufficiency, independence being important in having this perfection of love. So do you want to have a look at this?
Just one question, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's 2 questions, but you can just choose one question if you want, or you can even, of these 4 qualities, if you want, you can even choose one and see which one is sort of important for thinking about freedom, you know, in love.
It'd be good if you could put your screen up as part of one of the groups.
I know. I don't know that I can. You might need to take a photo of it.
Yeah, I haven't got my camera.
You can't. Yeah,
you can't, Lisa?
No, you can't.
Asking too much of the system.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe what I shall try and do is do the group thing again. And maybe we can give it about 10 minutes, and then I'll just come back, and probably we won't go through it together because time will be up, but we'll just sort of finish. And then tomorrow we'll go on to looking at, I suppose, more the social dimensions, like of the conditions we need to foster freedom in the world. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to do this. Going to rooms. Is this working? Okay, yes.
I think we're back as well.
Okay, alrighty. So shall we finish, and then tomorrow we'll do this last part on conditions for growing in freedom or expansion of freedom. Righty. So okay, so let's say Hail Mary, and we can finish. Hail Mary, with grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary,
Mother of God,
pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death.
Amen.